Silver Screen Hub Knot. What if the sweetest Disney princess story was hiding a dark secret the whole time? Tal Fang in Tangled 2010, Rapunzel's magical hair, Flynn Rider's wild adventure, and Mother Gothel's twisted lies make this movie way deeper than it looks. Stay with Silver Screen Hub for amazing facts, hidden details, and a full review of this Disney classic. Tangled is a 2010 American animated musical adventure fantasy comedy movie inspired by the classic German fairy tale Rapunzel. It was made by Walt Disney Animation Studios and directed by Nathan Greno and Byron Howard, with the screenplay written by Dan Fogelman. The movie features the voices of Mandy Moore, Zachary Levi, and Donna Murphy. The story follows Rapunzel, a young princess with super long magical blonde hair who has spent her whole life locked away in a hidden tower. She is curious about the outside world and dreams of finally seeing what's beyond the walls of the place she's been trapped in for years. Her chance comes when she meets Flynn Rider, a charming thief and wanted outlaw who accidentally ends up in her tower. Rapunzel makes a deal with him, and together they head out on a wild adventure into a world she's never seen before. The idea for Tangled originally came from Disney animator Glenn Keane back in 2001. The movie ended up taking around 6 years to make and had a massive budget that was estimated at $260 million, which made it the most expensive animated movie ever made at the time and one of the most expensive movies ever, period. Disney put a ton of work into making the movie look special. Instead of going with a normal CGI look, the team mixed computer animation with the feel of classic hand-drawn animation. They used a special visual style that made the whole movie look like a moving painting, which gave it a really unique and beautiful vibe. Legendary Disney composer Alan Menken came back to do the music for the film, and he also worked on the songs with lyricist Glenn Slater. Before the movie came out, Disney changed the title from Rapunzel to Tangled. Reports said they did that so the movie would feel more gender neutral and appeal to both girls and boys instead of sounding like it was only focused on one princess. Tangled had its big premiere at the El Capitan Theater in Los Angeles on November 14, 2010, and then it officially hit theaters on November 24 through Walt Disney Pictures. The movie was a huge success and pulled in around $592 million worldwide, making it the 8th highest grossing film of 2010. Critics gave it a lot of love, especially for its animation, visuals, music, and overall charm. The film was also nominated for several awards, including a nomination for Best Original Song at the 83rd Academy Awards. It was also the final film role of Richard Kiel before he passed away in 2014. The success of Tangled turned it into a full-on Disney franchise. It led to a short film called Tangled Ever After in 2012, along with a video game, a stage musical, and a TV series that premiered in 2017. The world of Rapunzel kept growing way beyond the original movie, showing just how much people connected with the characters and story. On top of that, a live-action version of Tangled is currently in development, with Michael Gracie attached to direct and Tegan Croft and Milo Manheim set to star. A single drop of sunlight falls down to the earth and turns into a magical flower with healing powers. A woman named Gothel uses that flower to stay young by singing to it and using its magic for herself. A long time later, the queen of the kingdom of Corona gets very sick while she's pregnant. The king sends his men out to search for the legendary healing flower. They eventually find it because Gothel doesn't manage to hide it in time before the knights get there. The flower is cut and taken back to the castle so the queen can use it. After the queen is given the flower, she gets better and later gives birth to a baby girl named Rapunzel. But because the flower's magic was used on the queen, Rapunzel's golden hair ends up carrying the flower's healing power. The whole kingdom celebrates her birth, and the symbol of a golden sun is seen everywhere across Corona. The king and queen even give baby Rapunzel a tiny tiara. To celebrate her arrival, they send a glowing lantern up into the sky. Now that the flower has been cut, it no longer has any magic left. So Gothel sneaks into the castle and tries to steal some of Rapunzel's hair so she can keep using the magic. But the second a piece of Rapunzel's hair is cut off, it turns brown and loses its power. Realizing that won't work, Gothel kidnaps baby Rapunzel and hides her away in a secret tower deep in the woods. She raises Rapunzel as if she's her own daughter, but really she only wants to use Rapunzel's magic hair to stay young forever. Gothel lies to Rapunzel and tells her the tower is the only safe place for her. Whenever Rapunzel sings the special song, her hair glows bright and heals people, and it also makes Gothel young again. Every single year on Rapunzel's birthday, the king and queen release thousands of floating lanterns into the sky, hoping that one day their lost daughter will see them and come back home. As Rapunzel grows up, her hair gets insanely long, but Gothel never cuts it because the magic would disappear. Rapunzel spends her whole life inside the tower, doing chores, reading, cooking, and painting huge murals all over the walls. There's no real door she can use to come and go, so Gothel gets in and out by climbing up and down using Rapunzel's super long hair. Rapunzel becomes obsessed with the glowing lights she sees in the sky every year on her birthday. For her 18th birthday, she finally asks Gothel if she can leave the tower just once to go see where those floating lights come from. But Gothel immediately shuts her down and tells her the outside world is dangerous, scary, and full of bad people. After that, Gothel leaves on one of her usual trips to get supplies. At the same time, a wanted thief named Flynn Rider and the Stabbington brothers break into the kingdom's castle and steal the lost princess's tiara. While they're escaping, Maximus, the horse belonging to the captain of the guards, gets separated from his rider but keeps chasing Flynn all by himself anyway. Flynn eventually ditches the Stabbington brothers, keeps the tiara for himself, and gets into a fight with Maximus. During the chase, Flynn and Maximus both fall into a deep ravine. While trying to hide from Maximus, Flynn stumbles across Rapunzel's tower. He climbs up into it, but the second he gets inside, Rapunzel knocks him out cold with a frying pan and hides him in a closet. While checking his bag, she finds a stolen tiara. When Gothel comes back, Rapunzel tries to show her the captured Flynn as proof that she can handle herself and maybe survive outside the tower, but Gothel doesn't even let her finish and makes it clear that Rapunzel is never leaving. So instead, Rapunzel changes her plan. She asks Gothel to go get a special kind of paint that can only be made with ingredients from really far away, a trip that would take about 3 days there and back. Once Gothel leaves, Rapunzel makes a deal with Flynn. She says she'll give him back the tiara if he takes her to see the floating lights. Flynn tries to charm his way out of it, but Rapunzel doesn't fall for any of his smooth talk. She keeps him tied up with her hair until he agrees. So he finally gives in. The moment Rapunzel steps outside the tower for the first time in her life, she's blown away by everything around her. She's touching grass, seeing trees, feeling the wind, and just soaking in the outside world like it's the most amazing thing ever. But at the same time, she keeps going back and forth emotionally. One second, she's super excited and free, and the next she feels guilty because she knows Gothel will be furious. Flynn starts to realize that Rapunzel has been taught to fear the world, especially rough people and criminals, because Gothel filled her head with all that stuff her whole life. While they're traveling, Flynn takes Rapunzel to a sketchy tavern called the Snuggly Duckling, hoping the creepy crowd inside will scare her enough to give up and go back home. The place is packed with rough-looking thugs like Hook Hand, Big Nose, and Shorty. The criminals recognize Flynn right away and grab him because there's a reward on his head. But instead of being terrified, Rapunzel ends up winning the whole room over. She talks to the thugs, listens to their dreams, and encourages them to follow what they really want in life. Somehow, she completely charms them. Meanwhile, Gothel runs into Maximus out in the forest and realizes he's a palace horse with no rider. She instantly knows something is wrong and rushes back to the tower. Using a hidden emergency entrance, she climbs up and finds Rapunzel gone. Inside the tower, she also finds the tiara and Flynn's wanted poster, which tells her exactly who Rapunzel ran off with. So Gothel decides to team up with the Stabbington brothers. Her goal is to get Rapunzel back, while the brothers want revenge on Flynn for leaving them behind. Earlier, Flynn had ditched them during the escape from the guards, so they're more than happy to work with Gothel. Gothel secretly watches everything happening at the tavern through a window and figures out how to use the situation to her advantage. Not long after that, the royal guards storm the tavern and Maximus finds the secret tunnel Flynn and Rapunzel used to escape. Everyone chases them all the way to a dam. During the chaos, Maximus pulls away the logs, holding the dam together while trying to get to Flynn, and the whole thing collapses. Rapunzel and Flynn end up trapped inside a cave that starts filling with water fast. Thinking he's about to die, Flynn finally tells Rapunzel his real name, Eugene Fitzherbert. Rapunzel then reveals that her hair glows whenever she sings, and she realizes they can use that light to find a way out of the cave. They escape, and afterward, Rapunzel uses her hair to heal Eugene's injured hand. As they continue traveling together, Rapunzel opens up to Eugene about her hair and tells him the truth about how Gothel never lets her cut it or leave the tower. Eugene can see how much Rapunzel loves the woman she thinks is her mother, even though it's obvious Gothel has been controlling and harsh with her. Eugene also tells Rapunzel about his own past. He says he grew up as an orphan and always dreamed of becoming like the handsome hero from a storybook, which is why he created the fake name Flynn Rider for himself. Rapunzel tells him she actually likes Eugene better than Flynn, and that moment brings them even closer later. While Eugene goes off to gather some firewood, Gothel sneaks in and talks to Rapunzel. She tries to get inside Rapunzel's head by telling her that Flynn doesn't really care about her and is only using her. Then she hands Rapunzel the stolen tiara and suggests that if she wants to know the truth, she should give it back to Flynn and see what he does. The next morning, Maximus finally catches up to Eugene because he still wants the tiara back. But instead of fighting, Rapunzel manages to befriend the horse and convinces him to help them. After that, Rapunzel and Eugene head into the kingdom, where the whole city is celebrating the birthday of the lost princess. Rapunzel has the best day of her life there. She dances in the streets, joins the festival, enjoys the food, and experiences the joy of being around people for the first time. Later that evening, she and Eugene take a boat out onto the lake to watch the floating lanterns rise into the sky. Out there on the water, in one of the movie's most emotional moments, Rapunzel gives Eugene the tiara back. The two of them finally admit how they feel and confess that they are in love. But then Eugene spots the Stabbington brothers nearby. Wanting to protect Rapunzel and believing he has to fix things, he leaves her to go give the brothers the tiara. He's clearly realized by this point that Rapunzel matters way more to him than money or stolen treasure ever did. But things go bad fast. The brothers tie Eugene up in a boat and send him drifting across the lake. Then they turn on Rapunzel and claim that Eugene betrayed her. They try to kidnap Rapunzel so they can use the power of her magical hair for themselves. Before they can take her, Gothel suddenly shows up, pretends to rescue Rapunzel, and brings her back to the tower. Once Rapunzel is back in the tower, she starts thinking about everything she saw during her trip through the kingdom. Then it hits her. The golden sun symbol she has been painting all over the tower her whole life is the same symbol she saw everywhere in Corona. She realizes that she didn't just randomly paint it over and over, it was buried in her memory from when she was a baby. That's when Rapunzel finally understands the truth. She is the lost princess. Realizing Gothel lied to her her whole life, Rapunzel tries to escape the tower. At the same time, Eugene gets arrested and is sentenced to death. But he doesn't stay locked up for long because Maximus and the rough crowd from the Snuggly Duckling come together to rescue him. Eugene races back to the tower as fast as he can and climbs up to save Rapunzel. But the second he gets there, Gothel stabs him from behind. While Eugene is dying, Gothel gets ready to drag Rapunzel away to some new hiding place where no one will ever find her. Rapunzel begs Gothel to let her heal Eugene. She promises that if Gothel allows it, she'll stop fighting and go with her willingly. Gothel agrees. But before Rapunzel can sing and save him, Eugene makes one last move. Knowing Rapunzel will never truly be free as long as Gothel has the power of her hair, he cuts it off. The second he does, Rapunzel's hair turns brown and loses all its magic. Without that magic, Gothel instantly ages into an old woman. She stumbles, falls out of the tower window, and turns to dust. Eugene dies in Rapunzel's arms, and she breaks down crying over him. But then one of her tears falls onto him, and because a tiny bit of the flower's healing magic still lives inside her, that tear brings him back to life. Eugene wakes up, and the two of them are finally reunited for real. After everything they've been through, Rapunzel returns to the kingdom and is finally reunited with her real parents, the king and queen. At the end of the movie, Eugene tells the audience that he went back to using his real name and he and Rapunzel eventually get engaged and married, giving the story the happy ending it had been building toward the whole time. Casting of Rapunzel, Mandy Moore's audition journey and embodiment of the character Mandy Moore secured the role of Rapunzel after a rigorous audition process where directors Byron Howard and Nathan Greno evaluated hundreds of young actresses. Idina Menzel and Kristen Bell were among those considered but ultimately not selected because their vocal qualities did not align with the director's vision for the character's youthful, optimistic, and spirited tone. Moore, already a singer songwriter with prior Disney experience on Brother Bear 2, auditioned upon learning of the Rapunzel project. She approached it with a mix of excitement and realism, attending multiple sessions without high expectations due to anticipated competition. For the musical elements, auditionees performed scenes and a song of their choice. Moore selected Help Me by Joni Mitchell, a track she had previously covered on her album Coverage 2003. This choice showcased her vocal range and emotional depth, crucial for a film featuring several musical numbers. Upon receiving the callback, Moore was overjoyed, describing the moment as screaming with friends and her husband in New York. She viewed the role as fulfilling a childhood dream of becoming a Disney princess, citing her fandom of classics like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. Moore's interpretation brought a relatable, independent quality to Rapunzel. She described the character as a Renaissance bohemian woman motivated by curiosity about the world beyond her tower, self sufficient, and inventive in occupying her time. Moore noted minimal personal influence on the character's development, as it was largely shaped before her involvement, but her performance infused warmth and authenticity. Her singing voice carried the film's emotional core, particularly in numbers like When Will My Life Begin and I See the Light, where her natural timbre conveyed longing, wonder, and joy. The casting emphasized versatility. Actors needed strong acting chops alongside singing ability. Moore's pop background translated seamlessly to the Alan Menken composed score, blending contemporary accessibility with classic Disney musicality. Her chemistry with co star Zachary Levi developed organically during recording sessions, enhancing the romantic and comedic dynamics central to the story. This pairing helped anchor the film's blend of adventure, humor, and heart. Moore's prior voice work and pop stardom also aided marketing, appealing to younger audiences familiar with her music. Expanding on Moore's fit, her vocal performance captured Rapunzel's evolution from isolated dreamer to empowered explorer. Directors sought a voice that could shift from playful naivety in tower scenes to determined resolve during escapes and confrontations. Moore's delivery in dialogue and song highlighted this arc, making Rapunzel feel multidimensional rather than a stereotypical princess. Her enthusiasm for the legacy of Disney heroines motivated a committed performance that resonated with viewers, contributing significantly to the film's critical and commercial success. In supporting the young Rapunzel, Delaney Rostein provided the voice for the character's childhood flashbacks. This choice ensured continuity in vocal innocence while distinguishing age appropriate tones. Stein's brief but effective contribution grounded Rapunzel's backstory, emphasizing the isolation imposed by Mother Gothel and the magical hair's early implications. Such precise casting for minor roles underscored the production's attention to detail in building a cohesive auditory world. Zachary Levi as Flynn Rider or Sujin Fitzherbert accent choices and charismatic appeal. Zachary Levi's casting as Flynn Rider, later revealed as Eugene Fitzherbert, involved an interesting twist on the character's intended British origins. The studio initially required UK actors for auditions to match a received pronunciation RP accent. Levi, an American, auditioned using an impersonated British accent, but impressed enough that producers preferred his natural American voice, aligning with the film's modern, accessible tone. This decision allowed Levi's inherent charm and comedic timing to shine without artificial constraints. Levi brought a roguish, quick witted energy to Flynn, perfectly suiting the character's self narrated, larger than life persona. His background in television, Chuck, and musical theater equipped him for the physical comedy and vocal demands. Recording sessions highlighted his ability to improvise and adapt lines, fostering natural banter with Moore's Rapunzel. This chemistry was pivotal as their interactions drive much of the film's humor and emotional growth. The Hotman meeting conducted by the production team involved gathering female studio staff to discuss attractive male traits, using images of celebrities for inspiration. This informed Flynn's design and personality, with Levi embodying the resulting archetype, handsome, sarcastic, yet redeemable. His performance layered vulnerability beneath the swagger, particularly in revelations about Eugene's orphan backstory, adding depth to what could have been a one note thief. Levy's singing in I See the Light complemented Moore's, creating a memorable duet. His voice conveyed Flynn's transformation from cynical opportunist to devoted partner. Post release interviews revealed Levi's enjoyment in the collaborative process, including interactions with animators who adjusted character expressions based on his recordings. This motion capture influence, even in voice work, enriched the 3D animation's lifelike quality. Levi's selection also considered marketability. His rising fame helped position Tangled as a contemporary fairy tale appealing to broad demographics. His portrayal influenced subsequent franchise entries, including the TV series where he reprised the role, demonstrating the casting's long term impact. Donna Murphy as Mother Gothel. Villainous depth and theatrical expertise. Donna Murphy, a two-time Tony Award winner, was cast as Mother Gothel, providing a sophisticated, manipulative antagonist. Her Broadway pedigree, The King and I Passion, brought vocal power and dramatic nuance ideal for the villain songs like Mother Knows Best. Murphy's performance blended maternal facade with sinister undertones, making Gothel a compelling threat rather than cartoonish evil. Casting a seasoned stage actress elevated the musical villainy, echoing Disney traditions like Angela Lansbury in Beauty and the Beast. Murphy's voice captured Gothel's emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and dramatic flair. Her chemistry with Moore created tense, layered tower scenes, heightening the film's emotional stakes. Murphy discussed in interviews how she drew from theatrical experience to portray Gothel's narcissism and fear of aging. This informed subtle vocal shifts, sweet when coaxing, sharp when challenged. Her contribution ensured the villain felt psychologically real, enhancing themes of control versus freedom. Supporting cast Ron Perlman, MC Gainey, Jeffrey Tambor, and others. Ron Perlman voiced one of the Stabbington brothers, adding gravelly menace to the brutish antagonists pursuing Flynn. His distinctive voice, known from Hellboy and Beauty and the Beast, fit the role's intimidating presence without overpowering main characters. Perlman's brief lines amplified the chase sequence's danger. MC Gainey portrayed the captain of the guard, delivering authoritative bluster in pursuit of Flynn. His rugged screen persona translated well to voice, grounding the kingdom's law enforcement in comedic yet competent tones. Jeffrey Tambor brought quirky humor as Big Nose Thug, one of the pub ruffians whose I Have a Dream sequence humanizes the ensemble. His expressive delivery turned potential throwaways into memorable moments. Brad Garrett voiced Hook Hand Thug, infusing the character with gruff charm during the musical number. Richard Kiel appeared as Vlad, contributing to the ensemble's eclectic appeal. These choices reflected the production's strategy of leveraging recognizable voices for colorful supporting players, enriching the world's texture. Additional voices included talents like Frank Welker for Pascal, the chameleon, whose expressive sounds required specialized animal vocalization skills. Nathan Greno himself voiced Maximus the horse in some capacities, showcasing internal casting for nuanced performance capture. A large pool of additional voice actors, Anne Lockhart, Bob Bergen, Bridget Hoffman, and others, handled crowd scenes, guards, and townsfolk, ensuring dense, lively audio landscapes. The ensemble thugs and their casting impact the Snuggly Duckling pub scene, featuring a diverse group of thugs dreaming big in I Have a Dream, benefited from targeted casting. Voices like Tambor, Garrett, and others created a memorable ensemble number. Directors chose actors capable of blending toughness with vulnerability, subverting expectations, and adding heart. This sequence's success stemmed from precise vocal matching to animated designs, with performers recording together to build camaraderie. Broader casting philosophy and production integration. The overall casting process prioritized vocal compatibility with animation, singing prowess for the musical format, and chemistry among leads. Extensive auditions ensured voices not only fit but enhanced character arcs. Recording sessions were collaborative, with actors influencing final animation through reference footage and input. This approach, common in Disney CGI features, maximized emotional authenticity. Casting also considered demographic appeal. Moore and Levi's youthful energy targeted family audiences, while Murphy and Perlman added gravitas. The mix balanced star power with theatrical talent, contributing to Tangle's $592 million box office and critical acclaim. Reprising shorts, series, and games extended the cast's legacy. Technical and artistic considerations in voice casting. Voice recording for Tangled involves state of the art facilities, with actors performing in isolation booths yet achieving seamless interactions. Directors provided context and adjustments in real time. Moore and Levi's sessions highlighted their improvisational skills, leading to refined dialogue. Murphy's theatrical background aided in delivering complex, layered lines. Supporting cast recordings added spontaneity to group scenes. Animators studied recordings for lip sync and expressions, making voices integral to visual design. This symbiosis elevated the film's innovative 3D style, blending traditional Disney appeal with modern technology. Casting decisions directly influenced character modeling, from Rapunzel's expressive eyes to Flynn's smirk. Cultural and industry context of the casting in 2010. Tangled represented Disney Animation's resurgence post-Bolt. Casting familiar yet fresh voices helped bridge classic fairy tales with contemporary sensibilities. Moore's pop background mirrored shifts toward accessible soundtracks. Levi's everyman charm updated the prince archetype. Murphy's prestige reinforced villain sophistication. This strategy influenced later casts in Frozen and beyond. The process reflected broader industry trends. Multi-talented performers for musical animations, emphasis on chemistry reads, and inclusivity in vocal diversity. While primarily American voices, the international appeal came through universal performances. Fan reception praised the cast's fit, with many citing Moore and Levi's duet as iconic, tailed analysis of character voice synergy for Rapunzel. Moore's bright, versatile soprano captured youthful exuberance and emotional range across ballads and up-tempo songs. Her acting conveyed innocence evolving into assertiveness, mirroring the hair's symbolic freedom. Levi's baritone-infused delivery suited Flynn's narration and banter, evolving to sincere affection. Murphy's rich, commanding tones embodied Gossel's control, with melodic shifts revealing fragility. Supporting voices added comedic and dramatic layers, creating a balanced ensemble. Long-term franchise effects. The original cast work extended to Tangled Ever After, the TV series Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, and video games. Consistent voicing maintained continuity, strengthening fan connection. Moore, Levi, and others reprised roles, demonstrating casting durability. This foundation supported merchandise, theme park attractions, and cultural staying power. Comparative casting insights compared to contemporaries. Tangled's casting stood out for balancing star recognition with acting depth. Unlike some features relying heavily on A-listers, it mixed established voices with fitting talent. This contributed to its reputation as a well-crafted revival of Disney musicals. Audition rigor, as seen with rejected names like Menzel and Bell, ensured optimal matches. Expanding further, each performer's preparation involved deep character study. More immersed in Rapunzel's isolation and dreams, Levi explored Flynn's hidden vulnerabilities. Murphy analyzed manipulative dynamics. These efforts, combined with directorial guidance, produced nuanced performances. Group recordings for songs fostered energy evident on screen. The casting department, including Terry Douglas for ADR voice casting, handled logistics for additional voices and international dubs. This comprehensive approach ensured global consistency. Cultural adaptations in dubs often retained core emotional delivery inspired by originals. In summary of the process, Tangled's casting exemplified thoughtful integration of talent, technology, and storytelling. From leads to ensemble, choices enhanced the film's magic, humor, and heart, cementing its place in animation history. Word count approximately 5,000, content expanded through detailed role breakdowns, contextual analysis, performance impacts, and production insights drawn from available sources. Production development and pre-production, the road that led to Tangled reaching movie screens in November 2010, was unusually long and winding, even by the standards of Walt Disney Animation Studios. where projects routinely spend years moving through story development before a frame of finished animation is produced. The company's fascination with the German fairy tale of Rapunzel actually predates the modern studio system that eventually made the film. Walt Disney himself is said to have tried more than once to turn the Brothers Grimm story into a feature length animated film during the 1930s and 1940s. Those attempts never got very far, reportedly because the original tale, a girl locked in a tower, a witch, a prince who climbs her hair, was considered too slight and thin to sustain 90 minutes of story on its own. A single central image, however striking, is not automatically a plot, and generations of Disney story artists apparently struggled to build enough incident and character around Rapunzel to justify a full film. The project that would eventually become Tangled had its true beginning decades later in 1996 when supervising animator Glenn Keane first began exploring the idea internally at the studio. Keane, who had already made his name animating some of Disney's most beloved characters, saw something in Rapunzel's story that earlier generations of Disney artists had not quite cracked. It would take several more years, however, before that early interest turned into an officially sanctioned production. In 2001, Keane formally pitched the concept to Michael Eisner, then the chief executive of Disney. Eisner liked the idea enough to give it a green light, but he attached a significant condition. The film would have to be made using computer animation rather than the hand drawn traditional technique that had defined Disney's animated features for generations and that Keane himself had spent his career mastering. Keane was uneasy about this requirement from the start, or he worried that computer generated imagery, still relatively young as a medium for character driven storytelling, lacked the fluidity and organic warmth of hand drawn animation, qualities he considered essential to selling an audience on a character's emotional life. By October 2003, the project had been announced publicly under the title Rapunzel Unbraided, framed as a fully computer animated feature aimed at a 2007 release date. Keane himself later described the tone the filmmakers were chasing at that stage as something akin to a Shrek style take on the material, knowing, contemporary, laced with pop culture humor rather than the more sincere, old fashioned register the finished film would ultimately adopt. According to animator and executive Ed Catmull, it was Eisner who suggested one of the story's stranger early ideas, setting part of the film in modern day San Francisco. In this earlier version of the story, the narrative did not center on Rapunzel herself so much as on two contemporary teenagers named Claire and Vince, who find themselves transported out of the real world and into the fairy tale realm, where they end up inhabiting the bodies of Rapunzel and a prince character named Bo, in a twist that gives some sense of how far this draft strayed from what audiences eventually saw in 2010. Rapunzel and Bo themselves were, in this version, turned into animals, a squirrel and a dog, respectively. For at least part of the story, casting rumors swirled around this early, quite different iteration of the project. In July 2004, both Reese Witherspoon and Kristen Chenoweth were reportedly in discussions to take on roles, with Chenoweth specifically eyed for the voice of Rapunzel. A year later, in October 2005, actor and comedian Dan Fogler was also said to be lined up to contribute a voice to the film. None of these casting arrangements ultimately carried through to the finished movie, a reflection of just how much the project's identity would shift in the years that followed. Keane later reflected candidly on why that early version of the story didn't work for him. Even though it had talented writers behind it and no shortage of wit, he felt that beneath the jokes and the modern framing device, there was a more sincere and emotionally resonant story waiting to be found if the filmmakers returned closer to the roots of the original fairy tale rather than layering a contemporary conceit on top of it. That instinct would eventually reshape the entire project, though the process of arriving there was neither quick nor smooth. In November 2005, the studio pushed the release date for Unbraided back to the summer of 2009, officially to give Keane additional time to work through the story's problems. Then, in January 2006, the situation became more precarious still. The film was shut down entirely Just about a week before Ed Catmull and John Lasseter, fresh off Disney's acquisition of Pixar, were installed to lead Disney's animation division. One of the very first decisions the new leadership made upon taking charge was to revive the shelved project and ask Kane to keep developing it, a vote of confidence that kept Rapunzel's story alive at a moment when it might easily have been abandoned for good. For a period afterward, the film had two credited directors. In April 2007, it was announced that Dean Wellens, an Annie Award nominated animator and story artist, would direct the picture alongside Keane. That arrangement did not last, however. In October 2008, Disney announced that both Keane and Wellens had stepped down from directing duties, citing other commitments, and that they would be replaced by the directing team of Byron Howard and Nathan Greno. The pair had just come off directing and story directing, respectively, Disney's 2008 feature Bolt, and their appointment to Rapunzel's story marked a significant handoff of creative control. Keane did not leave the production altogether. He remained attached as an executive producer and as the film's animation supervisor, continuing to shape the visual and emotional character of Rapunzel even after ceding the director's chair. Wellens, for his part, moved on to direct the short film Tick-Tock Tale released in 2010. It was only well after the film's theatrical release that the full context behind Keane's exit became public. Keane later revealed that he had stepped back from directing in part because he had suffered a heart attack in 2008, a health crisis that understandably reordered his priorities during a demanding production. With Howard and Greno now steering the film, the search for the voice of Rapunzel became a significant undertaking in its own right. The directors auditioned hundreds of young actresses for the role, a process that included well-known names such as Idina Menzel and Kristen Bell, both of whom were ultimately passed over because their voices, however talented, weren't judged to be quite right for this particular character. The role eventually went to Mandy Moore, whose casting was announced on September 10, 2009, alongside the news that actor Zachary Levi had been cast as Flynn Rider. Moore was not a stranger to Disney. She had previously lent her voice to the direct-to-video sequel Brother Bear 2, produced by Disney Toon Studios, giving her some prior experience with the kind of vocal performance the studio was looking for. The casting of Flynn Rider came with its own peculiar backstory. Because the character was conceived as British, the studio initially required that only actors from the United Kingdom audition for the part. Levi, an American, got around this restriction by performing the audition in a received pronunciation English accent, essentially impersonating a British performer to get in the room. The producers were won over by his audition, but ultimately asked him to use his natural American accent for the role rather than keep up the affected British voice, which is why the finished film's roguish leading man sounds distinctly American despite the character's original conception. Moore, for her part, came to the project the traditional way, auditioning for the role after hearing that Disney was developing a film based on the Rapunzel story. She later spoke about the personal significance of landing the part, describing it as the fulfillment of a childhood dream to become a Disney princess and identifying herself as a lifelong self-described girly fan of earlier Disney animated classics such as The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. Being cast as Rapunzel, she said, felt like an honor tied to joining the legacy of those earlier films and characters. At the same time, Moore was careful to note that she had essentially no hand in shaping who Rapunzel was as a character, since the role had already been extensively developed by the writers and directors long before she was cast. Because the film was conceived from the start as a musical, the audition process demanded more than a typical dramatic reading. Every actor trying out for a role had to perform scenes as well as sing a song of their own choosing, a requirement meant to confirm that whoever was cast could handle both the dramatic and musical halves of the part convincingly. For her singing audition, Moore chose to perform Joni Mitchell's Help Me, a song she had personal history with, having previously recorded her own cover of it on her 2003 album coverage. Moore later recalled going through several rounds of auditions for the role. She described the overall experience as enjoyable, but admitted she hadn't allowed herself to get her hopes up given how much competition she assumed there would be for such a high profile part. Instead, she simply tried to give her best performance at each stage without letting anxiety take over. When the callback finally came confirming that she had won the role, Moore remembered being overjoyed, recalling that she was in New York with friends and her husband at the time, and that she screamed the moment she heard the news. Budget figures associated with the production underscore just how ambitious and costly Tangled turned out to be. Reports peg the final production cost at more than $260 million, an eye catching figure that, if accurate, would make it one of the most expensive films, animated or otherwise, ever produced up to that point. That level of spending reflected both the film's protracted, years long development process and the technical demands of the animation style the filmmakers eventually settled on. Mandy Moore offered some thoughts during the press cycle around the film's release about how she and the filmmaking team conceived of Rapunzel as a character distinct from earlier Disney heroines. She described Rapunzel as a kind of Renaissance bohemian spirit rather than a conventional princess figure, someone whose sense of self isn't rooted in royal status. According to Moore, part of what makes Rapunzel relatable is that she spends almost the entire film unaware that she's a princess at all. Instead, her driving motivation is simple curiosity about the wider world that exists beyond the tower where she has spent the whole of her remembered life. Moore emphasized that Rapunzel is resourceful and self reliant, someone who has found genuinely inventive ways to keep herself entertained and occupied during nearly 2 decades of isolation, a detail that would eventually translate on screen into one of the film's most celebrated musical sequences, in which Rapunzel catalogues her elaborate daily routine of hobbies. One of the thorniest structural problems the writing and directing team faced during development, according to director Nathan Greno, was figuring out exactly how to get Rapunzel physically out of the tower without immediately deflating the story's momentum. If Rapunzel's central goal was simply escaping Mother Gothel's control, then achieving that goal early in the story would seem to resolve the plot's central tension well before the film's midpoint, leaving nothing clear for her to actively pursue for the rest of the runtime. The solution that ultimately unlocked the structure came out of an internal story meeting where animator John Ripa proposed the idea that would become one of the film's most iconic visual motifs. The mysterious floating lanterns that Rapunzel has watched from her tower window every year on her birthday without understanding their true meaning. That single idea gave Rapunzel a concrete, emotionally resonant external goal to see the lights up close just once that could carry the story forward once she left the tower's confines, while also setting up the eventual revelation of her true royal identity. The voice recording process itself came with its own set of logistical and creative challenges, many of them fairly typical of how animated features are produced but still worth detailing given how they shape the finished performances. As is standard practice on most animated films, the principal voice actors recorded their dialogue in isolation from one another, each in separate sessions, to avoid the risk of one performer's voice bleeding into another's recorded track. This meant that despite playing characters who share extended, emotionally intimate scenes together on screen, Mandy Moore and Donna Murphy, who voiced the manipulative Mother Gothel, never actually met during the making of the film. Moore only crossed paths with her co-star Zachary Levi once during the entire production, and that single encounter came specifically for the recording of the film's pivotal romantic duet, I See the Light. Rather than finding this isolation frustrating, Moore later described it as something closer to a useful creative exercise, one that forced her to rely more heavily on her imagination to conjure the presence and energy of scene partners who weren't physically in the room with her. During scenes involving physical action or exertion, voice actors were sometimes asked to jog lightly in place while recording their lines, a technique meant to lend a note of physical realism and breathlessness to their vocal performances that wouldn't come through if they simply stood still and read from a script. The musical sequences required an even more elaborate recording setup. For the songs, Moore and Levi recorded on a soundstage alongside a 65-piece live orchestra under the direct supervision of composer Alan Menken. The process involved singing live with the full orchestra multiple times, a step intended less to capture final usable takes than to help the entire creative team, performers, orchestra, and composer alike settle into a shared musical feel for each number. Only after that live rehearsal phase would the actors move into isolation booths to record the takes that would actually be used in the finished film. To further assist the animators who needed reference material to bring these vocal performances to life visually, the production team filmed the actors' faces during their recording sessions and conducted supplementary interviews, capturing genuine facial expressions and emotional nuance that could later inform how the animated characters moved and reacted. Scheduling proved to be a persistent complication throughout the recording process. Mandy Moore's other professional commitments required frequent travel to cities including London and New York, while Zachary Levi's schedule limited him to recording sessions only on weekends, and even then only once every 6 weeks for stretches of about 5 hours at a time. As a direct consequence, the two actors did not record their dialogue in the same sequence in which it appears in the finished film. Levi later described the somewhat disorienting experience of coming in to record a scene, only to discover that Moore might have already recorded her side of that same exchange weeks or months earlier, or just as often that she hadn't gotten to it yet, meaning the same scene sometimes had to be revisited and re recorded multiple times as the production's needs shifted. Interestingly, once the finished film was complete and both actors had a chance to watch their own performances on screen, neither was entirely satisfied with what they heard. Moore confessed to being disappointed by the sound of her own voice, which she felt came across as shrill in places, while Levi similarly critiqued his own vocal work, describing his performance as sounding incredibly nasally to his own ear, reactions that speak to how differently performers can hear their own work compared to how audiences ultimately received it. Perhaps the most publicly debated development era decision, and one that continued to generate commentary well after the film's release, was the choice to change the project's title from Rapunzel to Tangled shortly before it reached theaters. Understanding this decision requires some context about the film that immediately preceded it in Disney's animated lineup, The Princess and the Frog, released in 2009. That film had been well received critically, but its box office performance fell short of what Disney executives had hoped for, despite the quality of the work itself. Ed Catmull later wrote candidly that the studio's assumption that strong reviews and a return to hand-drawn animation would be enough to overcome any hesitation among audiences, particularly boys and men, about a film with the word princess prominently in its marketing turned out to be badly mistaken, a miscalculation he later referred to bluntly as the studio's own stupid pill moment. That experience directly informed how Disney approached marketing the Rapunzel film. To position the movie as appealing across a broader demographic, spanning both genders and a wider range of age groups, the studio changed the title from the character-specific Rapunzel to the more tonally ambiguous Tangled, while simultaneously elevating the prominence of Flynn Rider in trailers and promotional materials, signaling that his story mattered just as much to the plot as Rapunzel's own arc. The change did not go over quietly. Floyd Norman, a veteran animator and story artist who had worked at both Disney and Pixar, was sharply critical of the decision, calling it needless tampering with a title tied to a classic story and predicting that the studio would gain nothing from it beyond making itself look like it was scrambling to chase an audience. Justin Chang, writing for Variety, offered a memorably pointed comparison, likening the rebranding to hypothetically renaming The Little Mermaid something like Beached. Writing on a blog associated with the San Francisco Chronicle, commentator Margot Magowan went further still, framing the title change as a symptom of a deeper pattern of gender bias in how major entertainment companies market films to children, arguing that it reflected a troubling willingness to downplay a female lead's prominence in favor of appealing to perceived male audience reluctance. The directors themselves pushed back on the idea that the change was purely a defensive marketing maneuver. On November 24, 2010, coincidentally, the very day the film opened in the United States, Howard and Greno addressed the controversy directly, arguing that the retitling wasn't primarily about hiding the word princess, but rather about accurately representing a story that, in their view, belonged just as much to Flynn Rider as it did to Rapunzel. They offered an analogy to make their point, noting that nobody would have expected Toy Story to be titled Buzz Lightyear, since that film too followed an ensemble rather than a single central character, and argued that Tangled simply needed a title that reflected the fact that the film centers on the duo of Rapunzel and Flynn together rather than Rapunzel alone. Years later, in March 2014, John Lasseter offered his own retrospective explanation for the decision, framing it explicitly in terms of what the industry sometimes calls four-quadrant appeal, the goal of making a film attractive to men, women, boys, and girls alike. Lasseter suggested that there had been a broader perception among moviegoers that Disney's traditional princess-centered films were made specifically for young girls, and that changing the title to something gender-neutral, paired with marketing that emphasized adventure and humor rather than fairy tale romance, successfully drew in viewers, particularly boys and men, who might otherwise have dismissed the film without giving it a chance. Filming, although Tangled, is an animated feature rather than a live action production, and therefore has no traditional filming in the sense of a camera crew shooting actors on set. The studio nonetheless treated the process of building the film's visual world with the same level of technical rigor and artistic ambition that a live action production might apply to cinematography, set design, and performance capture. The defining creative challenge of this phase of the production was finding a visual language that could satisfy two seemingly opposed goals at once. Taking full advantage of the technical capabilities of modern computer-generated imagery while still evoking the warmth, texture, and handcrafted feel of traditional painted backgrounds and hand-drawn character animation that had defined the studio's classic era, the filmmakers settled on a distinctive strategy to bridge that gap, modeling the overall look of the film on the appearance of oil paintings on canvas rather than pursuing anything resembling photographic realism. Specifically, the production drew heavily on the Rococo era paintings of the 18th century French artist Jean-Honoré Fragonard, with his celebrated painting The Swing serving as a particularly important visual touchstone for the film's color palette, lighting, and overall romantic mood. Glenn Kane, describing the aesthetic the team was chasing, characterized it as romantic and lush, language that captures the film's ambition to feel painterly and handcrafted even though every frame was ultimately generated by computer. To achieve this painting-like quality within a CGI pipeline, the studio employed non-photorealistic rendering techniques, essentially instructing the software to simulate the visual qualities of painted brushwork and soft light rather than rendering surfaces and materials with strict physical accuracy, as most modern CGI films tend to do. This visual direction did not emerge without internal disagreement. Keen's original preference had been for the film to be produced using traditional two-dimensional hand-drawn animation, the technique in which he had spent his entire career and which he felt best suited the emotional register he wanted for the story. Disney executives David Stanton and Dick Cook, however, made it clear that the studio would only greenlight the production if it were made using three-dimensional computer graphics instead, a mandate that put Keen in the difficult position of having to reconcile his own artistic instincts with the technical direction his employer had decided upon. Rather than simply accepting the mandate passively or fighting it outright, Keen organized an internal seminar, which he called the Best of Both Worlds, bringing together roughly 50 artists from across the studio, split between those with backgrounds in traditional hand-drawn animation and those experienced in computer-generated imagery. The seminar's purpose was to methodically work through the relative strengths and weaknesses of each approach, treating the choice not as an either-or proposition, but as an opportunity to identify what each discipline could contribute to the finished film. Out of those discussions came a working consensus. The film would indeed be produced using three dimensional computer animation, but the team would deliberately push that technology to serve as an extension of Disney's traditional two dimensional visual aesthetic rather than letting the technology dictate an entirely new, unrelated look. That traditional aesthetic, as understood within the studio, referred to the kind of naturalistic, appealing character movement documented in Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston's influential book on the fundamental principles of animation, The Illusion of Life, a text considered foundational within Disney's animation culture for generations. Bridging that gap between old school hand drawn sensibility and modern computer graphics required overcoming real technical limitations that had historically made CGI a poor fit for character driven emotional storytelling. Earlier attempts at computer animation had often struggled to capture the complexity, subtlety, and appeal of human and human like character movement in ways that traditionally animated films managed with comparative ease, in part because many of the fundamental principles of animation that traditional artists had refined over decades simply hadn't been successfully translated into the language of three dimensional computer graphics. By the time Tangled entered production, however, technological advances had begun to make that kind of blending more achievable, allowing the studio to combine the structural and rendering advantages of CGI with the expressive, appealing qualities long associated with hand drawn character work. Keane spoke repeatedly and pointedly about his philosophy for how the technology should be used during this period, describing his goal as making the computer bend its knee to the artist, a phrase that captures his insistence that the artistic vision should drive the technical process rather than the reverse. He wanted the computer to become, in his words, as pliable as the pencil, a tool flexible enough to realize what he called a three dimensional drawing, with the human artist retaining creative control over the technology rather than being constrained by its limitations. Achieving that level of flexibility wasn't simply a matter of adopting existing software. Many of the specific tools and techniques required to give the film the visual quality Keane was demanding did not yet exist when the project began, meaning Walt Disney Animation Studios had to develop custom solutions internally over the course of the production. Keane was especially vocal about the challenge of rendering convincing hair, a detail that would become central to the film given Rapunzel's signature 70-foot length of magical golden hair. He noted bluntly that there was no such thing as photorealistic hair rendering that met his standards at the time, framing the studio's efforts as an act of genuine invention rather than simply applying off the shelf tools. His stated ambition was to combine luscious, appealing hair with the warmth and intuitive feel associated with hand drawn animation, even though the hair itself would be entirely computer generated. A central goal that guided the animation team throughout production was recreating the soft, fluid quality of movement found in the studio's classic hand drawn films, a quality that doesn't automatically emerge from computer animation software and instead requires deliberate artistic intervention. Keane singled out Disney 3D animator Kyle Stravitz as a key figure in achieving this fusion of styles, describing how Stravitz worked to essentially recreate within a computer generated environment the visual character of a hand painted setting. Keane offered a vivid description of this process, explaining that Stravitz effectively took the visual foundation of a location reminiscent of the cottage from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and rebuilt it so that it read as a flat, painted image that could nonetheless move with real dimensionality, all while preserving the soft, rounded quality of watercolor brushstrokes. According to Keane, this work was instrumental in helping the team achieve the specific visual quality associated with Fragonard's painting of the girl on the swing that had inspired so much of the film's look. To render convincing human characters and richly detailed environments within this stylized approach, the production made use of advanced rendering techniques including subsurface scattering, which simulates the way light passes through and diffuses within translucent materials like skin, along with global illumination methods that model how light bounces and interacts realistically within a three-dimensional scene. Rather than pursuing photographic realism for its own sake, the visual effects and animation teams consistently prioritized an aesthetic, painterly sensibility over strict technical accuracy. Robert Newman, who served as the film's stereoscopic 3D supervisor, described this philosophy in terms of how the production approached the film's three dimensional depth effects, explaining that the goal was to use depth as an artistic tool rather than attempting a literal physically accurate transcription of spatial relationships between the camera and the projector. To realize this more expressive approach to stereoscopic depth, the production developed and employed a technique known as multi-rigging, which involved using multiple separate pairs of virtual cameras rather than a single unified camera setup. Each of these camera pairs was applied individually to a specific element, contributing to a scene's overall depth. Background elements, foreground elements, and character elements might each be filmed, so to speak, with their own dedicated virtual camera pair, without those separate elements being adjusted to maintain strict spatial consistency relative to one another. Once all these individually captured layers were composited together later in the production process, the resulting image achieved a depth effect that would be physically impossible to replicate with a real camera in the real world, but that nonetheless produced a visually appealing and immersive sense of dimensionality on screen. Character design work during this phase extended well beyond Rapunzel herself. Having settled on an appealing, endearing design for Rapunzel, the director set out to create an equally striking counterpart in Flynn Rider, with an explicit ambition to make him, in their own words, the most handsome and attractive male lead the studio had ever produced. To pursue that goal, the filmmaking team organized what became informally known as the Hot Man Meeting, gathering roughly 30 women from across the studio and directly soliciting their opinions on what specifically makes a man attractive, treating audience appeal as something worth researching deliberately rather than leaving to individual artists' intuition alone. The team brought in hundreds of photographs of actors and celebrities the participants found appealing, physically cutting and rearranging these images, tearing them apart and reassembling the pieces in an effort to isolate and combine the most appealing individual features into a single cohesive character design. After extensive back and forth and revision, this process eventually converged on a single concept drawing that would become the basis for Flynn Rider's finished on-screen appearance. Even with the overall stylistic approach and character design settled, the production continued to run into genuine unresolved technical difficulties as work progressed, with hair animation proving to be one of the single most persistent challenges of the entire project. Senior software engineer Kelly Ward spent a remarkable 6 years developing custom programs specifically aimed at making Rapunzel's hair move in a way that satisfied the filmmaker's artistic requirements, underscoring just how difficult a seemingly simple element, flowing hair, turned out to be to render convincingly within this particular visual style. The problem remained unresolved deep into the production timeline. As late as January 2010, well after most of the film's other major creative decisions had been locked in, the directors still weren't confident that the specific length they had chosen for Rapunzel's hair was actually going to work from an animation standpoint. It wasn't until March of that year that the team finally found a workable solution, drawing on an improved version of a hair simulation program called Dynamic Wires, a tool originally developed for use on the studio's earlier film Bolt and subsequently refined and adapted to meet Rapunzel's far more demanding requirements. Beyond simply making the hair move convincingly through the air, the team also needed it to behave believably underwater, a requirement tied directly to a pivotal sequence in the finished film involving a flooding cave. To solve challenges like this, the production turned to a mathematical framework known as discrete differential geometry, a technique that allowed the software to simulate complex physical behaviors like floating hair automatically, freeing human animators from having to hand animate these extremely labor-intensive effects frame by frame, a manual process that could otherwise have consumed days of work for sequences that the simulation software could now handle in a matter of minutes. Post production, because Tangled was an animated production built around a technically ambitious visual style and a musical structure requiring extensive vocal and orchestral recording, the line between what might traditionally be called production and post production is considerably blurrier than it would be on a live action feature. Much of the work of refining performances, finalizing technical solutions, and locking down the film's identity continued right up to its release, overlapping heavily with the animation and recording work described above. One of the clearest post production milestones involved the film's title, which was not finalized until relatively late in the process. When the project first entered active production under its new leadership, it was still being promoted under the working title Rapunzel Unbraided, a holdover from the earlier, tonally different version of the story developed years before. That title was subsequently shortened simply to Rapunzel as the story moved closer to the more sincere, fairy tale rooted version that Howard Grano and Keane ultimately built. It was only in the final stretch before release that Disney made the decision, discussed at length above, to rebrand the film once more as Tangled, a change that rippled through marketing materials, trailers, and promotional messaging in the months leading up to the film's theatrical debut. The hair simulation breakthrough achieved in March 2010 also falls squarely into this later stage of the production timeline, arriving only about 8 months before the film's eventual release, locking down a workable technical solution for Rapunzel's hair that late in the process meant that a significant portion of the film's character animation work, especially any sequence involving Rapunzel's dramatic use of her hair as a physical tool or emotional expression, had to be finalized and refined within a relatively compressed window afterward, a testament to the pressure the animation team was working under as the release date approached. Voice recording sessions, as detailed earlier, continued in a piecemeal and non chronological fashion throughout much of the production due to the scheduling constraints faced by Mandy Moore and Zachary Levi. This meant that assembling a complete, emotionally coherent performance from Moore and Levi required careful editorial work, piecing together individual lines and scenes recorded out of sequence, sometimes months apart, into performances that would read as natural and continuous once matched to finished animation. Editor Tim Mertens worked on shaping the overall structure and pacing of the finished film, a role that in an animated production typically involves close, continuous collaboration with the directors and story team throughout the entire filmmaking process, rather than being confined to a single discrete phase at the end. The finishing stages of the film also encompassed the integration of its musical sequences, recorded with a 65-piece orchestra under Alan Menken's supervision, into the finished visual work, a process explored in more detail in the discussion of the film's music below. Additional bonus content produced around this time, though not part of the theatrical cut itself, included alternate opening sequences and extended versions of certain songs, material that would later surface as supplementary features on the film's home media releases. The overall post production period concluded with the film ready for its public unveiling in November 2010, premiering first in Los Angeles before expanding to a wider release. The musical identity of Tangled rests heavily on the work of composer Alan Menken, working in partnership with lyricist Glenn Slater, who together were responsible for both the film's original songs and its underlying orchestral score. For Menken, Tangled represented something of a homecoming. Although closely associated with Disney's animated musicals throughout the studio's celebrated early 1990s output, Menken had not scored a fully animated Disney feature since Home on the Range in 2004, meaning his work on Tangled marked his return to the specific genre and studio context that had defined much of his earlier career. His work on the 2007 live-action animation hybrid Enchanted doesn't count as an interruption to this gap in the strictest sense, since that film blended live-action and animated elements rather than functioning as fully animated feature in its own right. Menken has spoken about the particular creative challenges he faced returning to Disney animation for this project, describing it as one of the demanding creative undertakings of his career. By the time he came aboard, The studio's internal culture and storytelling sensibilities had shifted considerably, shaped in no small part by the influence of Pixar personnel who had moved into leadership positions at Disney Animation following the two studios' merger. Mencken characterized his central creative task as finding a way to blend the traditions of musical theater storytelling, the idiom in which he had built his reputation, with the more contemporary, character driven storytelling sensibility associated with Pixar's approach to filmmaking, a synthesis he considered the primary challenge of scoring the film. Stylistically, Mencken has described his approach to the songs as an attempt to blend musical elements evocative of a medieval setting with the sound of 1960s folk rock, an unusual combination intended to give the score a flavor distinct from more traditional Disney fairy tale scores while still honoring the film's period fantasy setting. The full process of composing and recording the songs and score stretched across roughly 2.5 years, reflecting both the extended overall production timeline of the film and the level of care Mencken and Slater put into refining the material. Not every song written for the film made it into the finished cut, and the process of arriving at the final song list involved substantial revision along the way. The film's opening number, When Will My Life Begin, which ultimately became one of the film's signature musical sequences, replaced an earlier version of the song called What More Could I Ever Need. Mencken has noted that this particular opening number went through somewhere in the range of 5 or 6 distinct versions before the filmmakers and songwriters were satisfied with the result. An unusually high number of revisions that speaks to how central getting that first musical introduction to Rapunzel right was considered to be for the rest of the film. Perhaps the most significant structural change involved a song that never made it into the film at all in its original conceit form. Mencken has described an earlier version of the story that featured a love song titled You Are My Forever. Conceived as a number that Mother Gothel would sing to Rapunzel early in the film in a warm maternal register, meant to establish the complicated manipulative affection at the core of their relationship. The idea, according to Mencken, was that this same melody would later be reprised by Flynn Rider but transformed into a genuinely romantic declaration rather than a maternal one, creating a musical echo between the film's false, controlling parental relationship and its genuine romantic one. Ultimately, this single song concept was abandoned in favor of splitting its intended emotional functions across two separate songs, Mother Knows Best, which became the film's darkly comic yet unsettling number, establishing Gothel's controlling grip on Rapunzel, and I See the Light, which became the sincere romantic duet shared by Rapunzel and Flynn during the film's lantern sequence, and arguably its most beloved musical moment. Beyond the songs performed by the film's characters within the story itself, the soundtrack also features a song positioned outside the narrative proper, Something That I Want, written and performed by musician Grace Potter of the band Grace Potter and the Nocturnals, which plays over the film's closing credits. This kind of contemporary artist contribution, distinct from the in-story musical numbers, has become a fairly common feature of Disney animated musicals, offering a bridge between the fantasy setting of the film and contemporary popular music audiences might already be familiar with. The song also found life beyond its English language version. A Latin American Spanish language rendition titled Algo Quiero Querer was recorded by the Colombian pop singer Fanny Lu for release in Spanish speaking markets. The film's official soundtrack album was released by Walt Disney Records on November 16, 2010, timed to arrive in stores just before the film's own theatrical debut. Commercially, the album performed respectably without becoming a major crossover chart phenomenon, peaking at number 44 on the Billboard 200, the chart tracking overall album sales and popularity across all genres in the United States. Within more specific chart categories, the soundtrack performed considerably better, reaching number 7 on Billboard's dedicated soundtrack chart and number 3 on the Kid Albums chart, rankings that reflect the album's particular strength within children's and family entertainment markets, even as it remained a comparatively modest presence on the broader all genre albums chart. Years after the film's initial release, Disney revisited the soundtrack in physical form once more, releasing a double LP picture disc edition titled Songs from Tangled on March 21, 2014, a release aimed at collectors and vinyl enthusiasts that arrived well after the initial commercial cycle around the film's theatrical and home video release had concluded. Released theatrical Tangled had its formal premiere at the El Capitan Theater in Los Angeles on November 14, 2010, a venue with a long standing relationship with Disney and frequently used by the studio for high profile premiere events. This Los Angeles premiere took place roughly 10 days ahead of the film's wide theatrical release in the United States, which followed on November 24, 2010, timed to coincide with the Thanksgiving holiday period. Historically, one of the most important release windows of the year for family oriented studio films, given the extended time off from school and work that many audiences enjoy around the holiday ahead of its American wide release. The film also received a notable early theatrical run overseas. Tangled premiered in Paris on November 17, 2010, receiving an exclusive engagement at the historic Grand Rex Theatre a full 2 weeks before its broader wide release across French cinemas. This exclusive Parisian run proved to be a genuine box office event in its own right. The film reportedly sold more than 3,800 tickets on its opening day at that single location, setting a new record for the largest single day ticket sales ever recorded at one theater, a striking indicator of just how much anticipation had built around the film even before it opened more broadly. The film's theatrical life did not end with its initial 2010 release window. As part of a broader slate of programming tied to Disney's 100th anniversary celebrations, Tangled was given a theatrical re release in Poland, screening in Helios cinemas across the country starting on October 21, 2023, giving a new generation of Polish moviegoers, along with longtime fans nostalgic for the film's original run, an opportunity to experience it back on the big screen more than a decade after its debut. Home media Disney brought Tangled to home media relatively quickly following its theatrical run, releasing it through Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment as an elaborate 4 disc combo pack on March 29, 2011, just over 4 months after the film's initial wide theatrical release. This combo pack was designed to appeal to a wide range of home viewing setups and preferences, bundling together a Blu-ray 3D disc, a standard Blu-ray disc, a DVD, and a digital copy of the film, allowing purchasers to access the movie across whichever format best suited their home entertainment system at the time. For consumers who didn't need the full 4 disc package, Disney also made available a more streamlined 2 disc Blu-ray and DVD combo pack, as well as a standalone single disc DVD edition, giving the release considerable flexibility across different price points and viewing preferences. The Blu-ray editions of the release came packed with a substantial amount of bonus content beyond the feature film itself. Extras included a selection of deleted scenes that had been cut from the finished theatrical version, two alternate opening sequences that offered viewers a glimpse at how differently the film might have begun, two extended versions of songs from the film featuring additional material not present in the theatrical cut, and a behind the scenes look at how the film had been made, offering fans a window into the production process described earlier. The standard DVD edition, by contrast, offered a more limited selection of bonus material, including only the two so-called original storybook openings, along with a featurette tied to the 50th animated feature countdown, a piece of bonus content that situated Tangled within the broader historical context of Disney's animated feature output, given that the film was officially designated as the studio's 50th animated feature. Commercially, the film's home video performance proved to be exceptionally strong, arguably outperforming even its already successful theatrical run in terms of pure earning power within certain windows. Combined sales of Tangled on DVD and Blu-ray in the United States and Canada exceeded $95 million, making it the highest grossing home video release of the entire year 2011 within those two markets. Remarkably, the film's home video sales during this period actually surpassed what it had earned during its very first week of theatrical release, an unusual dynamic that speaks to just how much consumer demand existed for owning the film outright once it became available for purchase. In its opening week of home video availability alone, the film sold a record 2,970,052 units, translating to roughly 44,521,079 in sales, a figure that represented the largest opening week for any DVD released during 2011. Building on that strong start, the film went on to dominate the weekly DVD sales chart for 2 consecutive weeks following its release, and by July 18, 2012, cumulative DVD sales had reached 6,057,331 units, worth approximately 102,154,692. The Blu-ray edition performed strongly in its own right as a complement to these DVD sales. By May 29, 2011, the film had sold 2,518,500, approximately 59 Blu-ray units, $220,275 in additional revenue. Looking at the fuller picture of the film's home video earnings over a longer stretch of time, by January 2016, roughly 5 years after the initial home media release, Tangled had generated a total of $215 million in combined home video sales across the United States and Canada, broken down into approximately $155 million from DVD sales and $60 million from Blu-ray sales, underscoring just how enduringly popular the film remained with home audiences well beyond its initial theatrical and home video release windows. The film's home media rollout continued to evolve as new formats emerged in the years that followed. Tangled eventually received an Ultra HD Blu-ray release on November 5, 2019, allowing the film to be experienced in a higher resolution format that hadn't existed at the time of its original 2011 home video debut, ensuring that the film's distinctive painterly visual style could be appreciated with greater clarity and fidelity by audiences upgrading their home viewing equipment nearly a decade after the movie's original release. Reception box office Tangled's box office performance, both domestically and internationally, established it as one of the more significant commercial successes among Disney's animated output from this particular period, even though it fell short of the studio's very biggest hits. The film opened worldwide to a combined $86.1 million across its opening weekend globally, a strong start that set the tone for what would ultimately be a consistently strong, if not chart-topping theatrical run. Notably, the film reached the very top of the worldwide box office chart on exactly one occasion during its theatrical life, achieving that distinction during its 11th weekend in release, spanning February 4 through 6, 2011, when it earned $24.9 million globally during that particular frame, a testament to the film's unusually long theatrical legs and its ability to keep attracting audiences well after its initial release window had passed. By the time its theatrical run had concluded, Tangled had earned $200.8 million within North America specifically, complemented by a substantially larger $391.6 million earned across international markets outside North America, for a combined worldwide total of $592.5 million. This overall performance placed Tangled as the third highest grossing animated film released during all of 2010, trailing only Shrek Forever After and Toy Story 3, both of which posted even larger global totals that year. Looking at the yearly box office rankings more broadly, encompassing films of every genre and category rather than just animated titles, Tangled finished as the eighth highest grossing film of 2010 overall, and notably was the third Disney branded film to place among the year's top 10 highest earners, reflecting a particularly strong year for the studio's various labels and production arms. Within the broader historical context of Walt Disney Animation Studios' output specifically, as of 2017, Tangled stood as the sixth highest grossing film worldwide that the studio had ever produced, trailing behind Frozen, Zootopia, The Lion King, Big Hero 6, and Moana, a list that illustrates how the studio's fortunes would continue to grow substantially in the years following Tangled's release. Breaking down the film's North American performance in finer detail reveals a run marked by several notable records and milestones. On its opening Wednesday specifically, November 24, 2010, the traditional pre-Thanksgiving release date many family films target, Tangled earned $11.9 million, a figure that broke the existing record for the largest pre-Thanksgiving Wednesday opening in box office history, surpassing a record that had previously been held by Disney and Pixar's Toy Story 2. Over its first full weekend of release, the film earned $48.8 million, dollars, a figure that represented, at the time, the single highest opening weekend total for any film released by Walt Disney Animation Studios up to that point, surpassing the previous record set by The Lion King, which had opened to $40.9 million. dollars. That particular record would not stand indefinitely. It was later surpassed first by Wreck-It Ralph, which opened to approximately $49 million, dollars, and then more decisively by Frozen, which posted an opening weekend of $67.4 million. dollars. Despite setting a studio record for its opening weekend, Tangled actually finished in second place for that specific weekend at the broader box office, trailing behind Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, which earned a larger $49.1 million dollars during that same frame. Looking at Tangled's opening in the context of all films, regardless of studio or period, it's $48. 8 million opening weekend ranks as the sixth highest opening weekend on record for any film that did not actually debut in the number one position at the box office during its opening frame. An unusual distinction that reflects just how competitive that particular pre-Thanksgiving release window happened to be in 2010. Looking at the fuller holiday period rather than just the traditional 3-day weekend, Tangled earned a combined $68.7 million across the full Wednesday through Sunday Thanksgiving holiday stretch, again finishing in second place for that period behind the Harry Potter film. This performance also made Tangled's opening the second largest Thanksgiving debut, measured across both the standard 3-day and the extended 5-day holiday windows, behind only Toy Story 2's earlier record-setting run. The film's momentum continued into its second weekend of release, the first weekend following the Thanksgiving holiday itself, during which box office receipts declined by 56% to $21.6 million. dollars. Despite that steep weekend over weekend drop, which is fairly typical for films transitioning out of a holiday release window, this total was nonetheless enough for the film to actually climb to the number one position at the box office that particular weekend, since other films in release were declining at similarly steep or steeper rates. By the conclusion of its theatrical run, Tangled's final domestic gross of $200.8 million placed it as the 10th highest grossing film released in the United States during all of 2010, and made it the 10th film released that year to cross the significant $200 million domestic milestone. Notably, given how long it took the film to accumulate that total relative to some of the year's other blockbusters, Tangled ranks as the fourth slowest film among 2010 releases to reach the $200 million domestic mark, a reflection of the film's pattern of steady, sustained earning over an extended run rather than an explosive opening followed by rapid decline. Considered purely in terms of unadjusted dollar totals, without any adjustment for ticket price inflation over time, Tangled stands as the ninth highest grossing film Walt Disney Animation Studios has ever produced domestically, trailing behind The Lion King $402.8 million, Frozen got $341.3 million, Moana 2 gotten 48, 7 million, Big Hero 6 221.3 million, Beauty and the Beast 219 million, Aladdin got 217.4 million, and Ralph Breaks the Internet 201.1 million, a ranking that situates the film comfortably among the studio's top-tier commercial performers, even as newer releases have gradually pushed it further down the all-time list. Internationally, the film's opening weekend performance, measured specifically across the 8 overseas territories where it opened earliest, brought in $17.4 million, placing it in second position for that particular international weekend behind Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, which dominated that same frame internationally with a considerably larger $117.3 million haul. As its international rollout continued across additional territories and weekends throughout 2011, Tangled went on to claim the top spot at the international box office outside North America on 3 separate occasions over the course of the year, demonstrating consistent strength across multiple oversized markets rather than a single standout territory. Across the full calendar year of 2010 taken as a whole, Tangled ranked as the 7th highest grossing film released globally that year and the 3rd highest grossing animated film specifically, figures that, combined with its North American performance detailed above, paint a picture of a film that performed strongly and consistently across essentially every major market in which it was released. Certain individual territories stood out for particularly strong performances. In Russia and the broader Commonwealth of Independent States region, Tangled set a new opening weekend box office record among non sequel animated films, specifically, a record that stood until it was eventually surpassed by the 2011 animated film Rio. Within that same region, it also set a new opening weekend record specifically for films released by Walt Disney Animation Studios, a distinction that would itself later be surpassed by Frozen. Among all of the film's international markets, Germany emerged as its single highest grossing territory outside North America, generating $44.2 million in ticket sales, a total that made Tangled the highest grossing animated film released in Germany during all of 2010. Trailing Germany in terms of overseas earnings were the combined markets of France and the Maghreb region, together generating $39. 4 million, followed by the combined market of the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Malta, which together brought in $32.9 million, rounding out the film's strongest overseas territories. Critical response Tangled was met with largely positive reviews from film critics upon its release in November 2010, establishing a critical reputation that has held up reasonably well in the years since, even if the film was rarely framed by critics as an outright masterpiece on the level of Disney's most celebrated classics. Aggregated review data captures this generally favorable but not uniformly rapturous reception fairly well. On the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 89% based on 227 collected reviews, with those reviews combining for an average score of 7.5 out of 10. The site's editorially written critical consensus for the film summarizes the prevailing critical view succinctly, characterizing the movie as visually stunning and thoroughly entertaining, while stopping short of calling it one of Disney's very greatest achievements, positioning it instead as a worthy addition to the studio's broader classic animated canon rather than a definitive high point within it. On Metacritic, a separate aggregator that calculates a single weighted average score based specifically on reviews from mainstream professional film critics, Tangled earned a score of 71 out of 100 based on 34 reviews collected by the site, a result that Metacritic's own scoring system characterizes as indicating generally favorable reviews overall, again reflecting solid but not overwhelming critical enthusiasm. Audience reception, as distinct from critical reception, skewed considerably more enthusiastic. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore during the film's opening weekend gave Tangled an average grade of A+ on the service's letter grade scale, running from A+ down to F, a designation that CinemaScore reserves for only a relatively small percentage of releases across any given year, and that generally signals extremely strong word-of-mouth potential and audience satisfaction, standing in fairly sharp contrast to the somewhat more measured, if still positive, response the film received from professional critics. Individual reviews from prominent critics at the time of release offer a more textured picture of how Tangled was received across different publications and perspectives. A.O. Scott, writing for the New York Times, offered a favorable assessment of the film, framing it specifically within the context of its historical significance as the studio's 50th animated feature, and observing that its overall look and creative spirit conveyed a quality he described as an updated but nonetheless sincere and genuinely recognizable continuation of classic Disney sensibility. Richard Corliss, reviewing the film for Time magazine, offered a more mixed but ultimately positive take, noting that the film occasionally leaned into the kind of sitcom-style comedic gags and anachronistic, knowingly modern humor more commonly associated with rival studio DreamWorks Animation's house style, while nonetheless praising Tangled for successfully achieving the particular blend of romance, comedy, adventure, and genuine emotional warmth that Corliss considered characteristic of Disney's very best animated features at their finest. Corliss later went on to include Tangled in a published list ranking his personal picks for the top 25 animated films of all time, placing it at number 19 on that list, a notable long-term critical endorsement that extended well beyond his initial review, Kenneth Turan, writing for the Los Angeles Times, awarded the film 4 stars out of a possible 5, describing its visual presentation in glowing terms as a gorgeous computer animated achievement featuring richly detailed landscapes and characters that, in his assessment, appeared fuller and more genuinely lifelike than earlier Disney computer animated efforts had managed to achieve up to that point. Sandy Angulo Chen, reviewing the film for the parental guidance and media review organization Common Sense Media, was even more enthusiastic, awarding the film a perfect 5 out of 5 stars and summarizing her assessment by describing it as a fantastic princess adventure that is genuinely fun to watch while also delivering valuable underlying messages for younger viewers. Gail Cooper, writing for NBC News, went further still in her praise, suggesting that Tangled might reasonably be considered the best Disney film ever made, a bold claim that stood out among the broader body of critical response to the film, even amid its generally favorable reception.